Welcome back everyone to Udiper. This time, he'll be going through Final Fantasy IV, both the Pixel Remastered version and the 3 remake. I'm not going to include Final Fantasy IV, the After Years in this one because I saw the amount of content that is in that one and I think that deserves its own separate video, else this one will become too long. But maybe in future, when I do compile all the episodes, I will compile the After Years with the Final Fantasy IV review. So to get back on track from the previous installments, which was Final Fantasy III, even though it introduced a new job system that introduced tons of variety and game mechanics, it unfortunately fell short due to poor story writing as well as characterization, especially in the Pixel Remaster. So let's see if Final Fantasy IV will be a turning point for the series. But before we dive into the story, let's first go over the gameplay. In Final Fantasy IV, there have been numerous changes. First, the active party can now have up to 5 members, and there are a lot of characters that you will be swapping in and out during the story. Secondly, this is the game that introduces the Active Time Battle System, or ATB for short. This revolutionizes the fights in the game, where instead of waiting for everyone to have their turn, your party instead takes action once their ATB gauge fills. This forces the player to focus more on the battle and makes the fights in the game more intense due to the pressure of time. And when starting this game, I immediately felt it because I think I had a minor panic attack when choosing my moves for the first time because the time system just caught me so off guard. Because if you aren't quick enough in selecting an action, the enemy will take their turn, regardless of whether or not you have made a move. Additionally, you can swap between characters who currently have full gauges, allowing for more planning during battles. While at first this may be overwhelming, it adds a breath of fresh air to the fights as it makes it feel more challenging and in a way more rewarding. And in a way also offsets that tedium that you start to feel later in the game. And when I say it gets rid of that tedium, it really does, because I was still feeling the same amount of pressure that I felt in the middle of the game all the way up until the end, as I had to constantly focus, make sure that my characters were using the right move, that all my characters were healed before my boss literally used a move called the Big Bang. And let me tell you, that move did some devastating damage. The ATB gauge also adds this element where if you want to use some really powerful spells, you'll have to wait for their character to load up the move because they're busy chanting it. This removes the action of you usually spamming powerful moves each turn and adds a bit more of a strategic element as well, I'd like to say, because if your character is charging up a spell, you need to make sure they're covered and have enough health or else it'll be a waste of energy. Another big change from 3 is that the job system has been somewhat changed in 4, because in 4, characters are assigned a job throughout and there's only one instance of a job change in the game, although you could argue 2, but I'll get into that a bit later. This somewhat hinders the player from choosing how they want to build a party and will be stuck with the characters they have for that leg of the story. Although, excluding the first part of the game, you'll have access to black and white spells as well as summons, so it shouldn't really be much of an issue. Another big thing that is introduced in this game is that you can no longer buy spells to learn them. Instead, characters will learn magic as they level up and reach certain levels. There are also certain points in the story where a character will learn a specific spell, but those are far and few in between. You also can't double wield weapons, and instead, most characters can only hold one. So with that out of the way, let's get into Final Fantasy IV. And just a bit of a side note before I get into that, for some of the scenes I may actually use some of the cutscenes from the 3D remake because, believe it or not, and I was surprised by this, there was voice acting which really caught me off guard. And I know in this day and age that voice acting is kind of a norm for a lot of games, but I was just really excited considering that I've been playing 4 Final Fantasy games straight and this is the first instance of voice acting. But unfortunately it's in dub. When starting a new game, we are thrown straight into the opening cutscene with a fleet of airships heading to an unknown destination with some foreboding music playing in the background. We then cut to our protagonist, Cecil, the captain of the Red Wings and a Dark Knight from Baron. The Red Wings are returning home to Baron after a somewhat successful mission in Mysidia. However, Cecil, along with his crew, are plagued with guilt as he had slain innocents to retrieve the water crystal. Cecil then has flashbacks to Mysidia where him, alongside the Red Wings, are shown to be killing the mages that were guarding the crystal. On the flight back, his crew are unable to move past what happened during the mission. Already conflicted enough by their actions, he silences his crew by trying to justify it, saying that it was for the sake of Baron's prosperity, as their knowledge and possession of a crystal was enough to make them a threat. However, neither he or his own crew were convinced by his words, and to take his mind off it, some monsters have been sighted. After defeating the monsters, they mention that there has been a rise in monster attacks lately, Cecil feeling as if it may be an omen. Upon our arrival at Baron, Baigan comes to greet us, noting Cecil's concern over the mission the Red Wings had just returned from. Before allowing Cecil to speak to the king, Baigan requests he waits outside as he needs to speak to the king in private. He informs the king that Cecil is no longer to be trusted as he's beginning to question the king's actions. The king takes Baigan's counsel with appreciation, but says that as long as Cecil gathers the crystals, it doesn't matter and permits him entry. Cecil enters and then hands over the water crystal, where the king is in awe of its beauty, dismissing Cecil without even looking. However, before Cecil can leave, he is bothered by the actions he has just committed, and asks the king what are his intentions with the crystals. The king then quickly becomes defensive, almost antagonizing Cecil's concerns and attributing his doubts as treachery, gaslighting him into thinking that he is actively betraying the king and that he is in the wrong. For this, the king then strips him of his command of the Red Wings, with his pleas being ignored. To make Cecil prove his loyalty, he gives Cecil the quest of slaying the Mist Valley Phantom Beast and delivering a bomb ring to the village of Mist, where he is to begin journeying in the morning. Kane, the leader of the Dragoons and childhood friend of Cecil, then enters, trying to defend him by asking the king to reconsider. The king then antagonizes Kane as well, telling him that he can join Cecil on his mission. He then gives us the ring and kicks us out of the audience chamber. Confused and shocked as to what just transpired, Cecil apologizes to Kane for getting him involved. Kane doesn't mind, saying that Cecil will return to the Red Wings in no time, although Cecil isn't fully convinced. Kane then tells Cecil to rest until tomorrow and he'll handle the preparations in the meantime. Before resting, if you choose to speak to Kane, it'll give a bit of background for him and Cecil. Cecil explains that he became a Dark Knight on orders from the king and that it was meant to protect the kingdom of Baron and not for raiding, stating he envies the path that Kane chose. Kane acknowledges that he would have made it further up the ranks if he chose to become a Dark Knight as well, but instead chose to become a Dragoon. He tells us that his father was a Dragoon as well and passed away when he was young, so to keep some form of connection with him, he followed in his footsteps and became a Dragoon. Then making our way to the Western Tower, we will be stopped by Rosa, who is worried about Cecil's well-being. He tells her that he is fine but can't say the same for the Mysidians, describing it as a slaughter before leaving. Rosa again has to stop him and says that she will visit him later, looking back one more time out of concern, before leaving. Along his way, Cecil is then stopped by the Cid of Final Fantasy IV, marking the 4th iteration of him in the series thus far. He tells Cecil that Rosa has been worried about him and not to make her go through that again. He then asks about the conditions of the airships he gave the Red Rings, but before going further, he notices that something is bothering Cecil. Cecil reveals to Cid that he is no longer the commander of the Red Wings. Cid, outraged by this, says the Red Wings will become a mess without him. He then mentions that the king has also been acting strangely, requesting the construction of airships meant for killing people, lining up with the opinion that you can find of everyone in the castle if you go to speak to them, with some saying he suddenly has more energy out of nowhere, some noting his attitude has changed, as well as some horrible rumors coming to light about him. On our way to the room, we can also find the Red Wings drinking their sorrows away as they are trying to forget what happened in Mysidia. Upon finally reaching his room, Cecil sits upon his bed, bothered by the king's change in attitude and obsession over the crystals. He is conflicted, as he feels to confront him would be akin to the betrayal of the knight who raised himself and Kane like his own sons, saying that he will not betray the man he has admired for so long. Rosa then enters the room, voicing that she is worried as he had only returned from Mysidia, only to be going to Mist the next morning, stating that it's all too sudden for her. After some budging, Cecil finally reveals to Rosa that he is struggling to accept what happened in Mysidia, and that this is his fate as a Dark Knight, afraid that he'll soon stop feeling remorse for his actions. Rosa then tries to comfort him, but he is unswayed as he sees himself now as a coward, unable to defy the king. Rosa then stands and looks away, and says that the Cecil she loves wouldn't whimper like this. Struggling to continue, she then changes the topic and asks about his journey to Mist in the morning. He reassures her he will be fine as Kane will be joining him. She then wishes us well before leaving. Cecil thanks her but says to himself that as a Dark Knight they can't truly be together, fading to black. In the morning, Cecil meets with Kane, eager to start their journey. As they walk out, text then scrolls on the screen and reads as follows. And so, the Dark Knight Cecil was stripped of his command as captain of the Red Wings. He and the Master Dragoon Kane head for the Foggy Valley and the village of Mist. The advent of the airship marked the realization of Baron's dreams, but also the birth of its militarism. With its Royal Air Force, the Red Wings, Baron soon reigned supreme. Now, as monsters multiply and stir unrest, Baron only exploits its power to collect the world's crystals. Why? The crystals merely shed their light in silence. Before heading to Fog Valley, we can quickly stop by the city of Baron to speak to the residents there. When speaking to them, we find there is mention of the king only recently telling the soldiers to follow the way of the Dark Sword, and often get comments about Cecil looking threatening or like a bad guy. Additionally, you can meet Rosa's mother, who tells Cecil to leave Rosa out of the king's plans. We can then also enter Cid's home, where his daughter tells us that Cid has been working excessively, requesting that they ask him to stop, as he is becoming difficult. What's worse is that he's even arguing with some of the townsfolk, trying to protect the king from those bad-mouthing him. Leaving Baron and then heading to the Mist Cave, we will then have to fight our way through to find the Phantom Beast. Eventually, we'll get a warning from it to tell us to stay away. Choosing to ignore its warnings, the Mist will then come together and take the form of the Mist Dragon. This is an interesting fight, because during the fight the dragon will disperse into mist and we'll have to wait for it to return to its physical form before we can do any damage. And after defeating it, we are then free to complete the second leg of our quest, delivering the bomb ring to the people of Mist. Upon entering the village, the ring will immediately begin glowing and monsters will spawn out of nowhere, destroying the village. This shows that Cecil and Kane were meant to be sacrifices to raid the village without them being aware. Cecil and Kane, in shock and disbelief, then hear the cries of one of the villagers. Rushing over, they find a small girl crying over the corpse of her mother. She then tells us that her mother died because of the Mist Dragon's death. Both Cecil and Kane then come to the realization that this village is home to the summoners, and the king meant to kill all of them. Cecil then realizes and tells Kane that they killed the girl's mother by killing the dragon. Overhearing this, the girl then backs away slowly, scared. Cecil tries to calm her down by saying he didn't know what would happen, but Kane, accepting the situation, tells him that the girl needs to be taken care of or else they'll face the consequences instead. Cecil, saying that she's just a child, refuses to carry out any more meaningless slaughter, readying himself to fight Kane. But before it gets to that, Kane tells Cecil to relax as he is on his side and refuses to disgrace the Dragoons any further. Kane then tells him that they will need the support of other kingdoms and that they need to get Rosa out of Baron. Cecil tries to thank Kane, but Kane says that it isn't for his sake. Before they leave, they try to take the girl with them to somewhere safe. However, she's still angry over her mother's death and refuses to go. We then enter a battle with her, where she summons forth Titan out of anger, causing a landslide and separating Cecil and the girl from Kane. Waking up and getting his bearings, Cecil is glad to see that the girl is safe. He then looks around for Kane, but he is nowhere to be seen, and Cecil can only pray that he is alive. He then leaves, looking for a safe place for both of them to be able to rest. Moving away from the landslide and heading to the northeast, Cecil will come across the desert town of Kaipo. Upon arrival, Cecil will then head to the inn, where the innkeeper, concerned over the girl's well-being, allows us to stay free of charge for the night. Cecil then tries to check up on her, but she refuses to speak. He then apologizes to her about the death of her mother, understanding that she may never forgive him, but he still vows to protect her. While resting that night, the Baron's soldiers then enter, telling Cecil to hand her over so that they can annihilate her. Seems a bit excessive, but alright. Cecil then refuses to hand her over, thus entering a fight with them. So, a bit of a tiny heads up, if you want to make this fight a bit easier, I would recommend killing the general first, because after he is defeated, the soldiers will then be confused and are much easier to deal with. After defeating the soldiers, Cecil checks on the girl. She finally speaks to him, asking if he is alright. He tells her that he is fine and not to worry as he will uphold his promise of protecting her. Having earned her trust, she tells Cecil that her name is Rydia, and joins the party. We then cut to the next morning, where we are free to explore the village. Speaking to the residents of Kaipo, we will hear about the cities of Damcyan and Fabul. However, we won't be able to reach them as they are blocked off by some old man in the water cavern. Additionally, there is mention of an antlion cave east of Damcyan where untold riches hide. Another of the residents then warn us of 8 water serpents being spotted near the water cavern, a warning we will need to keep in consideration for later. Then some others also speak of Anna, the daughter of Sage Teller, who ran away recently. Then speaking to this one villager, he'll mention that a damsel from Baron was found passed out on the outskirts of town, who was then taken to someone's house to recover. Looking in the houses, we eventually find the damsel and it turns out to be Rosa. Running over to her, she only mumbles Cecil's name and is unresponsive. Speaking to the old man in the room, he tells Cecil that she has desert fever, and to cure it, he'll need a sand ruby, which can be found in a cave where an antlion dwells. But remembering what one of the residents said, he told us that to reach Damcyan and subsequently the antlion cave, we will need to pass through the water cavern. Making haste, we will then reach the water cavern where we will have to fight through to reach the other side of the mountains. Venturing deep enough, we will then come across the old man we were told about earlier. Upon speaking to him, he realizes that Cecil is a dark knight and requests his assistance. Inquiring further, he tells us that he must get to Damcyan to rescue his daughter from a bard that seduced her, and senses an ill omen. Cecil then realizes that this is Sage Teller, and while he confirms this, he also notices that Rydia is a summoner and will be able to provide even more support. He then warns us of a monster that dwells in the cave, which is resistant to magic, possibly the 8 water serpents that Cecil was warned about earlier, saying that with their combined effort they'll be able to defeat it. Sage Teller then joins our party. While venturing deeper, the party decides to stop and camp so as to regain their strength. Cecil and Teller then discuss Rydia while she is asleep, Teller speaking to Cecil about her potential, saying that she'll be able to master many spells with proper training. He then reminisces, saying her sweetness and innocence reminds him of his daughter Anna when she was at the same age. He then goes on to further explain that Anna eloped with the bard to Damcyan as he did not approve of their union, probably wondering if things could have been different if maybe he said something else. He then asks Cecil his reason for going to Damcian, where Cecil answers and says a friend of his has desert fever and needs a sand ruby. Before getting ahead of themselves, Teller reminds Cecil that they need to still handle the monster, and adds the description of it having 8 enormous tentacles. Thus, the villagers were mistaken in believing it to be 8 serpents. Before ending the conversation, Teller again makes mention of the troublesome feeling he has been having, hoping that his instincts are incorrect. Eventually traveling far enough, they then reach the monster and enter a fight with it. This was another interesting fight for me, as you'll have to defeat the Octo Mammoth, where its health is indicated by the amount of tentacles it has left. Upon defeating it, the party is now able to pass through the waterfall and enter Damcian. Heading to the castle, a cutscene then plays out where it's attacked by the Red Wings. Rushing towards it, we see that there are barely any survivors, and the castle is littered with corpses and debris. Reaching the top, we will find a lone woman, lying motionless in the center. Teller, in shock and anguish, realizes that it's Anna, his daughter, and his reason for traveling so far, rushing towards her. The bard then walks out. Seeing Teller at Anna's corpse, he begins backing away, either out of fear or disbelief. Teller then notices him and attacks him immediately, blaming the bard for Anna's death. During the fight, the bard doesn't fight back, begging for Teller for forgiveness as he is telling him to stop. Anna then speaks, asking them both to stop fighting, where Teller snaps out of his rage and runs back to her. She tells her father that Edward is the Prince of Damcian and apologizes for running away, as both of them were in love. She still didn't feel comfortable without his consent, so she was heading home until they were attacked by the Red Wings and their new commander, Golbez, a name unfamiliar to Cecil. Unfortunately, she doesn't know much about the new commander except for the fact that he is strong. Edward then further explains that they attacked because they wanted their crystal, regardless of the casualties. Edward further explains that everyone shielded him from the arrows, including Anna. Teller, hearing this, realizes that she loved him enough to give up her own life for him. She then passes away, apologizing one last time to her father and telling Edward she loves him. Teller, stricken with grief and anger, then turns his anger towards Golbez, asking Edward about any information he has on him. Edward just says that he arrived in Baron and became the new commander of the Red Wings, breaking down into tears as he explains that Golbez is leading them in finding the crystals. Teller then tells him to stop crying as it won't bring Anna back and vows vengeance upon Golbez, saying he'll personally take his life. Cecil tries to stop him but is pushed out of the way. Teller saying that he doesn't need anyone's help in taking him down, leaving the party. Edward, still grieving, is then told by Rhodia to stop crying as he is a grown-up and is not meant to cry. She then tells him that she lost her mother but is not going to cry anymore. Edward, still in grief, ignores her words and tells her to leave him alone as he doesn't intend to ever leave her side. Cecil then walks up and slaps Edward out of it, telling him that he is now the ruler of Damcian and should start acting like it, saying he owes it to both his people and Anna. He then introduces himself to Edward and then explains he needs his help as his friend in Kaipo is suffering from desert fever, and only the Sand Ruby can help her. Edward then asks for her name and Cecil tells him that her name is Rosa. Edward then turns to Anna's body and says that he can tell that she is important to Cecil as Anna was to him. He then speaks about the ruby and where it can be found. Furthermore, he offers his assistance as well as his hovercraft, allowing them to reach the cave by crossing the shallows. Before the party leaves, Edward comes back and says goodbye to Anna one last time and then rejoins them. As mentioned previously, with the hovercraft we will be able to pass over these small rocks and reach the antlion cave. Upon reaching the end of it, Edward will step forward and the antlion's fangs will pop out. He reassures them that it's okay as antlions are quite tame and don't attack people. However, when he tries to reach for it, it attacks Edward, and both Cecil and Rhodia step in to help fight it. After defeating it, the party obtains the Sand Ruby. However, Edward is still in shock as up until now antlions have been harmless, but Cecil informs him that the number of monsters has been rapidly increasing as of late, and that their behavior is changing, unable to shake the feeling of this being an omen. Moving past this and heading back to Rosa, the party will then expose it to the light of the Sand Ruby. She then immediately wakes up and is happy to see that Cecil is alive. He goes to check up on her and says that she is fine as they told him Baron he died due to the earthquake and mist and is happy to see that they were mistaken. After apologizing that she had to go through that, he then asks her about Golbez. She tells him that he was appointed as the new commander of the Red Wings by the king himself and that she feels he is manipulating the king to collect the crystals for him, on account of the king's strange behavior. She further explains that with the water crystal, the king will go after the other crystals, that being the fire crystal of Damcian, the water crystal of Fable, and the earth crystal of Troya. Edward then informs her that the fire crystal has already been taken. Realizing he forgot, Cecil then introduces the rest of the party to Rosa and says he wouldn't have been able to get the Sand Ruby without their help. Rosa then thanks them for their help and tells Cecil that they need to get to Fable as it could be their next target. Edward then interrupts, saying that they won't be able to reach it as it is blocked by a thick wall of ice, Rosa then looks to Rydia, asking if she can use the black magic fire to melt it since she is a summoner. Rydia then says she can't use it, and Rosa is surprised as it's an elementary black magic spell and that she herself can't use it as she is a white mage and can only cast white magic. Rosa then gets ready to join the party on their travels, but Cecil protests against this as she's still recovering and would be dangerous. But he is then stopped by Edward, who explains that Rosa only wants to be with him. He then accepts this on the condition that she gets as much rest as she can that night, and then joins the party. On that same night, Edward sneaks out and plays a sorrowful tune on his harp, still grieving for his dead lover. Unfortunately, he's then interrupted by a Sahagin that attacks him. While fighting back, Anna's soul then appears to him, telling him that he needs to fight and believe in himself. After defeating the monster, she tells him she needs to leave for a better place. But before she leaves, she tells him he needs to stop Golbez and fight for his people. Then after she is gone, Edward is then reinvigorated, planning to keep his promise to his beloved, but unsure as to how to accomplish it. We then cut to the morning where the party begins to make their way to Fabul. Using the hovercar to reach Mount Hobbs, they will then come across the wall of ice that Edward previously mentioned. Rosa then goes to Rydia and asks her to cast fire, but she refuses as she still has trauma from the destruction of Mist. Rosa then comforts her, telling her that she's the only one who can do this, and if she doesn't, more people can get hurt and that she needs to be brave. They then all encourage her, and with their support she is able to overcome her trauma and use the fire spell, unlocking it also for use in battle. With the ice out of the way, everyone thanks and cheers for Rydia, she no longer being affected by what happened in Mist. The party will then climb to the top of the mountain, where upon reaching it, they will find a lone Fabul monk fighting against monsters. He is able to stand his ground until he is unfortunately confronted by a mom bomb, leading to the party intervening. The party then enters a fight with the mom bomb, where this monster can split into mini bombs if not defeated quick enough. Defeating the monster, the monk will then thank us and introduce himself as Young, the High Monk of Fabul. He explains that he was on the mountain training with his men, but they were all killed by the beast's attack. The party then introduces themselves and warn Yang that Golbez of Baron is after the crystals. They further explain to him that Damcian's fire crystal was taken with ease and Fabul may be next. Taking this warning seriously, Young then tells them that they are already at a disadvantage as the only monks left are students, making them morally unprepared to defend the crystal. They then mention that Golbez may have been behind the attack and offer their assistance to Young to defend the crystal. After some convincing, he then accepts our help and joins our party. Leaving the mountain and making our way to Fabul, we can then explore and shop for items before speaking to the king. There honestly isn't much to find, where the most you can do is meet Young's wife and that's about it. Speaking to the king, Young warns him that they need to prepare for Baron's attack. However, the king is unconvinced by the information, asking Young if they can trust the Dark Knight and his companions, but Young still vouches as they had saved his life. Edward then interrupts and greets the king. The king then recognizes him, and Edward continues and explains to him about what happened to his kingdom and says that the tragedy at Damcian cannot be repeated in Fabul. The king, then taking Young's word, apologizes and orders him then to prepare his men for battle. The king then asks Edward and Cecil if they'll be able to help. Saying yes, the party gets ready to defend Fabul, Rydia and Rosa being assigned to assist the medics in the clinic, whilst the rest are sent to the front lines. We then cut to the front of the castle where Cecil, Young, Edward as well as the other monks get ready for the attack. We then enter a gauntlet of fights where after each one, the party is pushed further and further into the castle due to Baron's military might. Eventually, making it to the throne room and locking ourselves in, one of the monks then unlocks the door, revealing to be a monster in disguise. Defeating him and making it into the crystal room, Cain then enters. Cecil, surprised to see him alive, then runs up to him, happy to have his friend assist in battle. Unfortunately, Cain is not there to fight against, but for Baron, charging Cecil. We then enter a fight with Cain, where Cecil is confused as to why Cain is attacking him. Regardless of what you do, Cecil is defeated. Young then tries to stop Cain from delivering the killing blow, but Cain is then interrupted by Rosa, who enters along with Rydia. He stops and sees a shock and disbelief on her face, unable to follow through with his attack. A voice then asks why Cain is hesitating. Then a man in dark armor enters the room, revealed to be Golbez. He tells Cain to never hesitate to kill, using Cecil as an example. But Young and Edward step in and get blasted by Golbez's magic. On Golbez's order, Cain then fetches the crystal, but Rosa tries to plead with him to stop. Seeing that he is influenced by her words, Golbez then kidnaps her and leaves. Before leaving, Cain tells Cecil he won't be so lucky next time, then follows Golbez, Cecil powerless to stop him. Once they leave, the remaining party lie defeated, except for Rydia, who casts Cure to heal them all. The party then gather, recounting what has transpired, all of them saddened through the numerous failures they have experienced. Rydia then cheers them up, telling them that they now need to go help Rosa while also retrieving the crystals. Young and Edward then agree with her, ready to help Cecil as he helped them. The party then head to a nearby inn, resting and deciding on their next course of action. Before rescuing Rosa, they realize they need an airship and will need to sneak in and steal one from Baron. Cecil then adds that Baron's naval force is relatively weak, giving them a way to get in via the water route using a ship or boat. With the plan laid out, the party then decide to rest for the night, planning to request a ship from the king in the morning. But before ending this conversation, Young then asks about the dragoon that attacked them earlier. Cecil explains that his name was Kane, but since they last spoke, he's no longer the man he once knew. During the next morning, we cut to the king agreeing to prepare a ship for the party to use and ask for Young to accompany them. He then hands Cecil the Deathbringer, a sword of darkness which belonged to a dark knight that came to Fabul many years ago. He says that darkness can never prevail over true evil, but has faith that Cecil will be able to slay Golbez. Before leaving, you can also speak to some of the Fabul residents. If you speak to Young's wife, she'll explain that due to a non-stick frying pan, she was able to hold off the soldiers. Also, speaking to some of the guards, they'll mention a rumor that is spreading among sailors about the sea god's wrath. Leaving Fabul and going to the ship, a cutscene plays where Young's wife wishes them safe travels on their journey. The captain of the ship, happy to have us on board, then departs, and Young's wife waves goodbye to us. During the journey, the party then discuss their plan of action, but Edward is suddenly looking unwell, possibly from seasickness. The party then continues on their way, but suddenly the sea starts shaking and the skies turn dark. Leviathan then appears before us, forcing the captain to have to change course. The ship then gets hit and Rydia falls off the ship. Young then immediately jumps in to try and save her. Cecil then tries to help, but as he does so, Leviathan then dives and causes a maelstrom to form in the ocean, causing the ship to be sucked in. He then wakes up on the coast, alone, with no one around him. He tries to shout their names to no avail and fears the worst, coming to realize he's all the way back to square one. So before going on with the story, I'd like to take a bit of a pause here and just discuss my overall thoughts of it thus far. Overall, I'm enjoying the game's story much more than Final Fantasy III, as there's much more to latch onto. In 4, there's also more focus on the characters themselves compared to the previous installments. Because even in Final Fantasy II, which was the most story focused out of the 3 that I've played thus far, the characters didn't have this much interaction between one another. When looking at interviews and information regarding it, Square was aiming to have this be a much more story focused game, making it more serious and adding more weight to it.
こうはね、やっぱ暗黒騎士から始まるし、
はい、
話は重くしたかったんですけど、時田が結構演出をやったんですけど、はい、いわゆるスクリプトを書くような仕事なんですけど。いちいちくるくる回すんですよ。
時田さんが
回ってたね。
だからこれ
回す
こっちはちょっとストーリーとしては重くしたかった。
はい
だから、途中回転禁止令出しました僕は。
Additionally, they also wanted this to prevent players from feeling lost as to where to head next. This made a lot of sense, as one of the previous issues I had with 3 was that there isn't really any good reason for why you're heading from one location to the next. And because of that, I ended up feeling lost at points, as well as not feeling as engaged with the story or what was going on with the game. I don't really have many issues with the story thus far because I think it's quite well done. The only issue I do have that I did see as a bit of confusion was around why Kaipo didn't have any spare sand rubies in case someone had desert fever, because they are a town in the middle of the desert, so they are most at risk of, experiencing it. Because throughout the interactions, they didn't say they were rare nor that it was difficult to obtain. In fact, it's just that royalty were the ones that could obtain it, and prior to the events of Final Fantasy IV, the antlions that were guarding them were quite tame, making it easy for them to just go collect it. What possibly could be the reason is that maybe the royalty of Damcian were always busy, and there were a few cases of desert fever, meaning that it wasn't urgent to really stockpile them. I wouldn't go on the idea of it expiring, as when the party obtained it, there wasn't really any rush to it expiring, but the rush was mainly driven by helping Rosa. Just to quickly talk about the 3 remake as well, compared to the Pixel Remaster, it is a bit of an upgrade because, as I mentioned previously, one of the big differences in the game is that the 3D remake actually has voice acting, which again surprised me. To add more, when pausing the game, a thought bubble will appear over each character's head, telling the player what each of the characters in the party are currently thinking about. While a lot of these thoughts are reactionary and related to the current situation, some add more depth to the characters as they go over what they are feeling in that moment of time. As with 3, there's also an opening movie when starting up the game, and one last thing before moving on, these games have amazing soundtracks, and the best one I've found thus far is in Final Fantasy IV. If you listen closely to the background, I'm trying not to play Beneath the Mask Rain, and instead trying to play through all the soundtracks that are from Final Fantasy IV. And while the soundtracks from 1 to 3 were okay, this one just hits differently. So, with that out of the way, I want to talk about the characters now. First, I want to talk about Cecil. At the beginning of the story, Cecil is seen to be demotivated and conflicted, unhappy by following the path of the Dark Knight, as the only reason he became one was to support the King of Baron, who he idolized and saw as his hero, feeling that he owes him an unpayable debt for raising him and Cain. But after the actions in MIZU, he starts to feel helpless as he feels that going against the king is to betray him, but to continue following him could make him go against everything he stands for, becoming an issue of loyalty or doing what is right. The situation is also made much worse when he tries to confront the king and instead gets antagonized. It seems that this has been going on for a while, as Rosa implies that he has changed, as she says that the Cecil she loves would never whimper like this. This further implies that the king and his change in behavior has gradually worn his spirit down over time. What's more is that it's mentioned by the residents that the soldiers only recently picked up the path of the Dark Knight and they are unsure as to why. Throughout the story, Cecil views his path as something evil, and due to the feelings that he couldn't truly be with the one he loved, it adds some underlying stress on him that further wore him down much quicker. Even early in the game, his dislike for the path was shown, where he mentions to Cain that he is envious of him, as Cain chose to become a dragoon instead of a Dark Knight, as Cecil may have found this to be much better and a more noble path. Cecil then finally reaches his breaking point in Mist, where he cannot handle his actions anymore and stands against the king. From this point forward, you can see his true nature show through his actions and behavior, and that they oppose the ideologies of that of the Dark Knight. Throughout the game, a Dark Knight is viewed as someone who brings death and destruction, showing barely any humanity. The design of the Dark Knight armor also shows this, as in the character portraits in the Pixel Remaster and the opening cutscene of the 3D remake, their face is covered up by the mask, and the armor is that of something evil or sinister. What's even more, all of the weapons we get for this class tend to have menacing names, although there aren't many, with one of the swords even being called the Deathbringer, adding on to how this path is meant for death and destruction. But through his actions up until this point, Cecil is shown to be kind and caring, wanting to protect those he cares about and avoiding needless killing, polar opposite of the Dark Knight. After the earthquake, it seems that he's also now trying to make up for all the wrongs he has committed as well, as he promised to Rydia after destroying a village to protect her, and is not ashamed to admit his wrongdoings whenever speaking about it, and does not deny his role in aiding Baron. But it seems that even though he is redeeming himself, he's still not fully accepting his role, considering the fact he is getting more powerful equipment for the path of the Dark Knight, and is beginning to rely more on the powers of darkness and hasn't embraced the power of the light. Moving on from Cecil, I would like to go over the other characters. Next up is Yang. From his appearances, you can tell he's righteous, serious, and has direction in his life. I'd argue and say even the most in the party in the beginning of the game. Unlike the others, Yang already knows what he wants, understands his roles and responsibilities, and is sure of his actions, although not to the point he is cocky. Unlike Cecil, he is adamant about his beliefs and has a stronger conviction, able to argue against his own king and leads his students and fellow monks, hence why he earned the title of High Monk. Unlike Edward, he has courage and knows what he needs to do, able to not dwell on the deaths of his students and fellow monks to the point he is paralyzed and willing to fight against the Red Wings on his own. And unlike Rydia, he has more experience, but that's just mainly due to age. While this doesn't make him superior, it does show that he is at a point in his life much further than those in the party. And then moving on to Teller, while there isn't much to say about him, there is maybe some questions regarding his abilities in the game thus far, where he's able to use both black and white level magic spells, even some of the advanced ones like Blizzaga, indicating that he may be a sage similar to the ones in Final Fantasy III, where they are the masters of all forms of magic. Next is Rosa. While there isn't much to add about the character herself, it would be best to look at her and Cecil's relationship. Throughout the story, it's shown that they are quite close, as it's mentioned that she only became a white mage to support him on his adventures. The strength of the relationship is further emphasized when Rosa hears that Cecil may have passed, causing her to become worried and head to Mist on her own through the desert, risking her life and being struck by desert fever. On the opposite end, when Cecil finds that she is sick, his number one priority is saving her. Furthermore, he always puts her safety first, protesting her joining him on his journey as it may be dangerous, not realizing she just wants to be with him. Unfortunately, there isn't much to say about Rydia or Edward, as currently, Edward is trying his best to help stop Golbez and is working on himself to come to terms with Anna's death and uphold his promise of being brave for her. For Rydia, she has become stronger throughout and has matured as she is able to motivate the party when they are at a loss. Also for Cain, I don't want to go too deep into his character just yet. These characters don't have as much development as the ones I've mentioned previously, but I will revisit them a bit later when we get deeper into the story. And that is the end of episode 1. Thank you for watching and hopefully see you for the next one.